My name is Laura Berry. I'm 27 years old. I'm a combat medic for the United States Army. I've used my bare hands to hold a man's shattered spine together under the chassis of a truck on East 95 in the middle of a downpour. I'm used to the smell of blood and panic. But no battlefield is as cruel as my own family. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon when I received my stepsister's gold-embossed wedding invitation. On the envelope, my name was sloppily written as Laura. No guest invite included. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons to patch up a fake family photo. But the real slap in the face? To cover my years of absence before her billionaire in-laws, she spun a story that I had violent PTSD, a military nutcase who needed to be quarantined. They stripped me of my honor and thought I'd bite my tongue for appearances. They were wrong. Let me know where you're listening from, hit that like button, and witness how I use the truth to burn their fraudulent wedding to the ground. The locker room at St. Luke's Regional was dead silent, save for the erratic click-click flicker of a dying fluorescent bulb overhead. I stood there, shoulders heavy from a 14-hour shift that had ended with a messy multi-car pileup and too much adrenaline. My scrubs were clean, but my skin still carried the phantom itch of latex gloves and the sharp, chemical bite of iodine. I reached into my locker and pulled it out. A heavy cream-colored envelope from Crane and Company. $20 of cardstock meant to scream, old money, even if the people sending it were anything but. Then I saw it. The name on the front wasn't mine. It said Laura. It wasn't a typo. It was a message. After nearly a decade of service, my own sister couldn't be bothered to remember the 4 letters of my name. I set the invitation on the bench next to my empty plastic meal prep container. There was no plus guest card inside. Brittany didn't want my life or my presence. She wanted a prop to stand in the back of a photo so the Sterling family wouldn't ask why the bride's only sister was missing. I leaned my head against the cold metal of the locker. Memory doesn't come back like a dream. For a medic, it comes back like an after-action report. Cold, clinical, and undeniable. I was 9 when Michael, my father, brought Susan home. Within a month, the blueprint of my life was redrawn. Brittany got the master suite upstairs with the silk curtains and the 4-poster bed. I was told to pack my things and move into the old home office in the basement, a windowless box that smelled of damp concrete and forgotten tax returns. My childhood photos were swiped off the mantel and shoved into a cardboard box under the stairs. I learned to sleep on a metal cot, tucked away like a shameful secret, shrinking my existence until I was small enough to fit into the shadows. By the time I enlisted, that basement room didn't even belong to me anymore. Susan turned it into a staging area for her catering supplies. I left for basic training as a ghost with a serial number. I thought about the phone calls from the base. Long, lonely rings that Michael usually let go to voicemail. When he did pick up, I'd hear the clinking of silverware and the warmth of a dinner party I wasn't part of. "Hey, Laura, I'm with Susan and the in-laws," he'd whisper, his voice thin and cowardly. 90 seconds, okay? I'll call you back later." He never did. I spent 3 months in field exercises in the dirt, waiting for a single text to ask if I was alive. Nothing. My father had crawled behind Susan's shadow, using her disapproval as a shield to drop his responsibilities. Eventually, I just stopped checking the screen. I learned that in the Berry household, loyalty was a currency Michael only spent on the person holding his leash. I shoved the invitation into my tactical backpack, ready to walk out and forget the Berries existed for another 3 years. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah, a nurse on the surgical floor whose cousin was marrying into the Sterling circle. "Laura, check this." It's a screenshot from the Sterling family group chat. I opened the image. My blood didn't boil. It turned to ice. It was Brittany's handle. She had posted a long, heartfelt message to the Sterlings. "I'm so heartbroken that my sister Laura won't be in the wedding party. She's struggling with violent PTSD from her time in the Army. We're supporting her from a distance, but the doctors say she's a risk for outbursts. Please be gentle if you see her." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. She wasn't just erasing me anymore. She was using my service, the blood I'd cleaned off highway asphalt, and the lives I'd fought to save, as a weapon to make herself look like a saint. She had turned my honor into a sickness to keep her billionaire husband from finding out our family was just a bunch of hardware store managers and hourly cooks. My hands didn't shake. In the field, when a patient is coding, you don't panic. You stabilize, you assess, you neutralize the threat. The bitterness I'd felt for years didn't vanish, but it shifted. It hardened into something sharp, something tactical. I reached into the small pocket of my bag and felt the jagged edge of my military ID and the small jewelry box containing the only thing they hadn't managed to take from me, my mother's pearl earrings. Brittany wanted a show. She was going to get one. But I wasn't going to be the crazy sister in the corner. I slammed my locker shut. The sound echoed through the empty hallway like a gunshot. I didn't head for the exit. I walked toward the parking lot, my spine straight, my pace measured. I had an RSVP to deliver in person. The Sterling family is a fortress of old money and reinforced concrete. In Fairfield County, names like theirs aren't just spoken. They are carved into the cornerstones of skyscrapers and luxury developments. Charles Sterling didn't buy his way into this world with a lucky hand at a casino. He built it out of the red Connecticut clay, turning construction sites into empires. His son, Chad, is a shark in a bespoke three-piece suit, the kind of corporate attorney who thinks in billable hours and talks in ironclad contracts. They are the real deal. They have the kind of wealth that doesn't need to shout to be heard. Then there is my family. The Berries. We are the grease under the fingernails of the working class, but my sister Brittany spent the last year trying to scrub that reality away with a heavy coat of high-gloss lies. To fit into the Sterling's polished world, she painted over our rusted-out origins with the precision of a professional fraud. In the curated gallery of her Instagram, our father, Michael, is no longer the guy who spends his Saturdays counting galvanized bolts and mixing paint at the local Ace Hardware. Through her lens, he was magically rebranded as a hardware industrial executive. She even got him a cheap silk tie that looked like a noose around his thick neck just for the profile picture. Susan was the next project. Brittany turned her from a part-time cook who worked double shifts at a local diner into a boutique culinary consultant. It was all cellophane and cheap glitter. Brittany blocked my account months ago, cutting off any window I had into her fantasy. She didn't want the Sterlings to see a single photo of me in mud-caked fatigues or a hospital gown stained with someone else's blood. She wanted me invisible. She wanted a clean slate for her new life, and my reality was a smudge she couldn't afford. But the real masterpiece of her deception wasn't the fake job titles. It was the way she weaponized my sacrifice. A sister serving in the army is a social liability to a climber like Brittany, unless that sister can be turned into a tragic prop. She realized that explaining my years of absence was easier if she made me a victim. She started a whisper campaign, telling the Sterlings that I was broken. She used words she didn't understand, terms like combat-related instability and violent PTSD outbursts. She painted a target on my back while pretending to hold my hand. To the world, she was the brave, selfless sister protecting her disturbed veteran sibling. To me, she was a vulture picking at the bones of my honor. I stood in my cramped apartment, the air heavy with the smell of stale coffee and the hum of a refrigerator that had seen better days. I pulled open the top drawer of my scarred wooden desk. Buried under a stack of overdue utility bills was a flat cardboard folder. I opened it. Inside was a certificate, Excellence in Combat Nursing. It was signed by Colonel Sarah Jones. The paper was thick, the gold seal catching the dim light from the window. 3 months ago, I brought this certificate to the house. I wanted Michael to see it. I wanted my father to look at me and see something other than a disappointment. Brittany had been there, smelling of expensive perfume and deep-seated insecurity. She leaned over, looked at the document, and let out a short, sharp laugh. "That is cute, Laura," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Do they give actual medals for nursing, or is this just a nice little souvenir for the help?" Michael didn't even look up from the television. He just reached for the remote and clicked the volume up. The loud, cheerful voice of a weather reporter filled the room, drowning out the silence I was standing in. I didn't say a word. I just went back to my apartment, put the award in the drawer, and locked my world away. Tonight, I was picking that lock. I looked at the bed where I'd thrown my house shirt. I didn't need silk or designer labels to fight this war. I walked to my small closet and pulled out a navy blue dress I bought at Target for $39. It was simple. It was clean. It was the most honest thing in the room. I put on the pearl earrings, the only things my mother left me that Brittany hadn't found a way to hawk or hide. I stepped into my only pair of heels. My feet throbbed before I even turned the doorknob, but my spine stayed as straight as a bayonet. A soldier does not slouch, especially not when she is walking into an ambush. I know I am not the only one who has been made to feel like a stranger in their own family. If you have ever felt the sting of a relative using your hard work to make themselves look like a saint while they trample on your name, I need you to hit that like button right now. Leave a comment below with the word truth if you are tired of the fakes winning the game. Subscribe to this channel to see exactly how I walk into that sterling mansion and take my dignity back. Your support is the only fuel I have left for this fight. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. My 10-year-old Honda Civic was waiting in the gravel lot. It was a bucket of rust and dented fenders, a stark contrast to the German-engineered luxury cars that would be clogging the Sterling's circular driveway tonight. I didn't care. I threw the car into gear, the engine turning over with a tired, mechanical groan. The headlights cut through the thick Connecticut fog like a surgeon's scalpel. Brittany thought she had silenced me with her lies. She thought she had buried me under a mountain of fake medical reports and social media blocks. She was wrong. I wasn't going to that mansion to be a bridesmaid. I was going to be the consequence she never saw coming. The Sterling estate was only 20 minutes away. For Brittany, the clock was officially ticking. The Sterling estate loomed over Fairfield County like a monument to things I would never own. I pulled my 10-year-old Honda Civic into the circular driveway, the engine's rattle sounding like a gunshot against the hushed dignity of the neighborhood. I squeezed the car between a midnight blue Porsche and a Mercedes G-Wagon that cost more than my medical degree ever would. The gravel crunched under my tires, an ugly, grinding noise. I didn't get out. I sat there, hands locked at 10 and 2 on the cracked steering wheel. I could feel my pulse thumping in my throat. High, too high. I closed my eyes and started the count. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Box breathing. It's what you do when the shrapnel is flying and the world is screaming. You find the rhythm, or you die. I did it until the heat in my chest cooled into a hard, flat stone. I stepped out of the car. The evening air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive champagne. I smoothed down the $39 Target dress. It felt like sandpaper against my skin. I walked through the massive front doors, my spine as straight as a steel rod. Inside, the crowd was a sea of pearls and forced smiles. Nobody looked at me. To them, I was just part of the background, like a lamp or a piece of crown molding. I was a ghost in a room full of people who only saw dollar signs. My instincts kicked in. On a battlefield, you don't look at the scenery. You look for the exits and the high ground. I drifted away from the noise of the ballroom, moving down a quiet hallway lined with dark wood. A door at the end was cracked open. I pushed it. The room smelled of old books and expensive leather. It was Charles Sterling's private study. I scanned the shelves, my eyes stopping on a framed article on the wall. It was from the Fairfield County Register. The headline read, "Local businessman survives highway horror thanks to anonymous soldier." Next to it was a grainy photo of a man whose face was a mask of bandages. That was my second birthday. I turned. Charles Sterling stood in the doorway. He was tall, his presence filling the room like a physical weight. He looked at me, really looked at me, but there was no spark of recognition. To him, I was just a girl in a cheap dress. It had been 3 years since I'd knelt in the mud on I-95, my hands slick with his blood, whispering to him that he wasn't allowed to die. "The day someone gave me my life back," he said softly, his voice echoing in the quiet room. I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him that I remembered the way his hand had shook, but the door behind him slammed against the wall with a violent crack. Brittany charged in like a wounded animal. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a frantic, manic energy. "Don't bother, Mr. Sterling," she hissed, her voice a jagged blade. She didn't wait for an answer. She grabbed my upper arm, her manicured nails digging into my muscle, and hauled me out into the hallway. Susan was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Her face was a frozen mask of cold fury. She stepped close, her breath smelling of peppermint and gin. "What the hell are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. "Keep your mouth shut. Don't you dare try to make this about you. You're a guest, Laura. Act like one, or get out." I didn't flinch. I watched them the way I'd watch a jagged piece of metal protruding from a patient's chest. Dangerous, sharp, best handled with gloves. Eleanor Sterling glided past us, her silk gown rustling like a warning. She stopped and looked at me with a polite, distant curiosity. "And what do you do, dear?" Before I could even draw a breath, Brittany stepped in front of me, her smile bright and fake. "She does paperwork at the hospital. Admin stuff. Very quiet work." She grabbed my elbow again, pulling me toward the glass doors. "Let's go to the garden, Lara. It's getting a bit stuffy in here, don't you think?" I let them push me. I let them lie. I was a soldier. I knew how to wait for the right moment to strike. An hour later, I was back in the Civic. The rain had started, a cold, miserable drizzle that blurred the windshield. I pulled my phone out and dialed Michael's number. I didn't say hello. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Did you know?" I asked, my voice flat. "Did you know Brittany told the Sterlings I'm a violent head case? That I have PTSD because I'm a ticking time bomb?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then, the distinct, metallic flick of a lighter. I could picture him, sitting in his recliner, eyes fixed on the floor, hiding from the world. He sighed, and it was the sound of a man who had long ago traded his spine for a quiet life. "She's just trying to protect the family image, Laura," he said, his voice buzzing with a pathetic kind of annoyance. "She wants things to go smoothly. Don't make a scene. It doesn't hurt anyone." The words hit me harder than any physical blow. He knew. He had sat there and watched them bury my name in the dirt, and he hadn't said a word because it was easier. He was a coward, and his cowardice was the final betrayal. I looked at the steering wheel in the darkness. My heart didn't break. It froze. The last bit of warmth I'd held for the man who raised me evaporated into the damp air of the car. "Roger," I said. The word was short. Final. The response of a soldier acknowledging an order they no longer cared about. I didn't wait for him to speak. I tapped the screen and ended the call. I sat there for a long time, the rain drumming against the roof of the car. I wasn't the daughter they wanted. I wasn't the sister they could control. I was the ghost from I-95, and I was done hiding in the basement. I threw the car into reverse and let the tires spin on the expensive gravel. Brittany wanted a war. She just didn't realize who she was fighting. Friday night at the Oakmont Club was a masterclass in exclusion. The air inside the grand ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and the metallic tang of chilled champagne. But beneath the floral notes was the unmistakable smell of old, heavy money. 120 of Fairfield County's elite moved through the room like a well-oiled machine, their laughter polished and their clothes costing more than my first 2 years of medic training. I stood in the foyer, my spine a rigid line of military discipline that refused to bend. I was wearing the $39 navy blue dress from Target. No jewelry. Just my mother's pearl earrings. They felt like two small, cold anchors holding me to the earth. I checked the seating chart near the entrance. My name was there, tucked away at the bottom of the list. Table 14. I didn't need a map to find it. I followed the sound of slamming double doors and the heavy, humid smell of charbroiled steak. Table 14 wasn't in the ballroom proper. It was shoved into a corner right next to the kitchen entrance, caught in the crossdraft of the service staff's frantic back and forth. The lighting was dim here, shadowed by a massive marble pillar that blocked any view of the head table. My dining companions were a teenage babysitter scrolling through her phone and two empty chairs that felt like an intentional insult. This was the quarantine zone. The place where you put the relatives you have to invite but don't want anyone to actually see. I pulled out the heavy mahogany chair and sat down. I didn't slouch. I didn't hide. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, my eyes locked on the distant, glittering stage where the real family was holding court. Brittany was up there, a vision in white silk that shimmered under the cold light of the crystal chandeliers. She held a microphone encrusted with tiny diamonds, looking every bit the princess she'd spent a decade pretending to be. To her left sat Susan, wearing a smile as sharp as a scalpel, and next to her was Michael, my father. He looked comfortable in his tuxedo, his face flushed with the kind of pride he'd never once directed toward me. Brittany's voice filled the room, amplified and saccharine. She started her speech with the usual lies. She praised Susan as the mother she'd always dreamed of. She called Michael the bedrock of their lives, a man of industry and integrity. The crowd ate it up, their applause a rhythmic, hollow thudding that filled the gaps in her performance. Then she paused. The room went quiet. I felt the shift before I saw it. Brittany tilted her head, her gaze sweeping across the sea of expensive hairstyles until it landed, with the precision of a laser, on the dark corner of table 14. A slow, jagged smirk pulled at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a smile. It was a predator marking its kill. "And we can't forget my half-sister, Laura," Brittany said into the microphone. 120 heads turned. The spotlight didn't reach my table, but the collective weight of their stares felt like a physical heat. "She's just a soldier," Brittany added. The way she said it, "just a soldier," sounded like she was describing a grease stain on an expensive rug. She made the word soldier sound small, dirty, like a failure that the family was kindly tolerating. I felt the air leave my lungs. On the battlefield, I'd been shot at. I'd been covered in the blood of men who were screaming for their mothers. I'd held together bodies that were trying to fall apart. None of that felt as violent as the silence in that room. But the real blow didn't come from Brittany. It came from the head table. Michael leaned back in his chair and let out a laugh. It was a booming, hearty sound that cut through the silence. He wasn't laughing uncomfortably. He was laughing with her. He was huddling with the winners, joining in on the joke at the expense of his own blood. He laughed like my entire career was a punchline. Like the daughter who had crawled through highway wreckage was a source of amusement for his new, wealthy friends. Under the table, my hands moved. I didn't even realize I was doing it. My fingers curled into my palms, my nails digging deep into the skin. I squeezed until the pressure was a dull roar in my ears. I squeezed until I felt the warm, metallic slickness of blood blooming against my skin. Small, crescent-shaped wounds welled with blood in the center of my palms. I didn't flinch. I watched Michael's face, recording the way his eyes crinkled with genuine mirth. The pain in my hands was the only thing keeping me from screaming. I focused on it. 4 seconds in. 4 seconds out. The discipline of the medic took over, turning the white-hot rage into a cold, tactical clarity. At the Sterling table, Charles Sterling didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He sat with a champagne flute held halfway to his lips. His eyes narrowed as he stared across the room at me. He looked from Brittany to Michael, then back to the girl sitting by the kitchen door. He leaned over and whispered something to Chad, his expression unreadable, but his focus never wavered from my face. The speech ended. The music kicked back in, some upbeat jazz number that felt obscene. The guests returned to their steak and their gossip, the moment of my humiliation already being digested as a minor footnote of the evening. I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, the sound lost in the noise of the room. I didn't look at Brittany. I didn't look at Michael. I walked past the swinging kitchen doors, the smell of burning fat and dish soap hitting me one last time, and headed for the quiet of the hallway. My palms were still stinging, the blood drying in the creases of my skin. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to the restroom, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I needed to wash my hands. I needed to wash the smell of that room off my soul. I didn't get the chance. The door swung open behind me with a violent force, hitting the marble wall with a crack. Brittany stepped in, her silk dress rustling like the skin of a snake. She didn't look like a bride anymore. She looked like a threat. I rinsed the blood from my palms under the cold faucet. The water turned a pale pink before swirling down the drain. The fluorescent light above the mirror buzzed, a sharp mechanical mosquito that wouldn't die. I reached for a paper towel, but the heavy oak door slammed against the frame before I could touch the dispenser. Brittany. She did not look like a bride. She looked like a cornered dog. She spun the deadbolt with a violent snap, the click echoing off the marble tiles like a shot. Her white silk dress hissed as she marched toward me, her face twisted in a way the Sterling family would never see on her Instagram feed. The Princess of Fairfield was gone. In her place was the girl who used to steal my lunch money and lie about it to the principal. "What the hell was that?" she ranted, her voice a low, jagged rasp. She stopped inches from me, the smell of her $100 perfume clashing with the sterile scent of the hand soap. "What was that look you were giving Charles? Do you have any idea what you're risking right now?" I took my time with the paper towel. I dried my hands, finger by finger, the way I used to prep for surgery in the field. I didn't look at her. I looked at our reflection in the mirror. The woman in the $12,000 silk and the woman in the $39 Target navy blue. "The look?" I asked, my voice as flat as a dial tone. "You mean the look of a sister who just found out she's been diagnosed with violent PTSD by a woman who can't even spell the word combat?" Brittany flinched for a split second, then her eyes narrowed into slits. The mask didn't just slip, she ripped it off herself. "I didn't deny it," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. She had at her chin, her eyes darting over my cheap dress with pure disgust. "I had to take control of the narrative, Laura. Do you think the Sterlings want to hear the truth? Do you think a billionaire real estate empire wants to welcome some poor, gritty little medic who spends her life covered in dirt and highway grease? You are an embarrassment to this family. You always have been." I crumpled the paper towel into a tight ball. I thought about the men I'd saved. I thought about the blood I'd washed off my boots so I wouldn't track it into the barracks. And here she was, standing in a room that cost more than my annual salary, calling my life a failure. "Narrative control," I repeated. "Is that what you call it when you tell people I'm a ticking time bomb? When you tell my father to laugh while you spit on my service?" "I gave them what they wanted," she barked, stepping closer. "They wanted a reason why my only sister wasn't standing at the altar with me. I gave them a tragic hero story. It makes me look like the selfless one, the sister who's protecting the family. It makes Michael look like a saint for tolerating you. Tomorrow is my wedding. You are going to go back out there, you are going to sit at table 14, and you are going to keep your mouth shut. You won't talk to Charles. You won't talk to Eleanor. You will sit there like the broken soldier everyone thinks you are. If you say one word, one single word to ruin this for me, I will make sure you never see a dime of Michael's inheritance. I'll make sure you're erased for good. Period." There was no humanity left in her eyes, just the cold, calculated greed of a social climber who had finally reached the top and was ready to kick anyone who tried to follow. She looked at me like I was a piece of trash caught on the heel of her shoe. I looked at her. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't give her the outburst she had promised the guests. I used the eyes of a soldier looking at an enemy who had just walked into a kill zone. "Roger," I said. The word was a dead weight. It was the sound of a commander acknowledging a mission they had already mastered. Brittany blinked, her chest heaving as she waited for the fight that never came. She looked confused, then her face smoothed into a triumphant sneer. She thought she had broken me. She thought the black sheep had finally learned her place. I walked past her, my shoulder brushing hers. The silk of her dress felt like cold, dead skin. I pushed the deadbolt open and walked out of the restroom without looking back. 10 minutes later, I was in the parking lot. The Connecticut rain was a fine, miserable mist that turned the asphalt into a black mirror. I didn't care about the humidity or my hair. I walked to the Honda Civic, the heels of my shoes clicking a steady, rhythmic beat. I got inside, the door closing with a heavy, rusted thud that felt more honest than anything inside that club. I put the key in the ignition. My hand was on the gear shift, ready to pull out of this town and never look back. I was done. I was going to let them have their fake lives and their fake names. I was going to go back to the hospital, back to the blood and the reality that made sense. Then the phone in my cup holder buzzed. A notification from an unknown number. I picked it up, the screen light harsh in the dark car. I noticed you leaving early. Don't let them break you. Charles was asking about you all through dinner. See you tomorrow at the ceremony. Eleanor. I stared at the screen. The rain hammered against the roof. A frantic metallic drumming. Eleanor Sterling, the matriarch. The woman Brittany was so terrified of. She hadn't just seen me. She was waiting for me. My hand moved away from the gear shift. I pulled the key out of the ignition. The silence in the car was absolute. The broken soldier wasn't going anywhere. I reached up and touched the pearl earrings. Brittany thought she had issued a death sentence in that restroom. She didn't realize she had just given me the coordinates for the final strike. The wedding was at 10 a.m. I wasn't going to be sitting at table 14. I leaned my head back against the seat and watched the rain wash the dirt off my windshield. Tomorrow, the truth wasn't just going to come out, it was going to scream. The sun had not even begun to set over Fairfield County when the erasure became official. The Sterling estate was crawling with 200 bodies draped in silk, bespoke wool, and jewelry heavy enough to sink a boat. It was the wedding day, the main event. The air smelled of expensive hairspray and the kind of perfume that stays in your lungs long after the person has left the room. I did not have a place in the procession. I did not have a seat in the front row. I had a spot at table 18. If table 14 at the rehearsal dinner was the basement, table 18 was the parking lot. It was shoved so far back that the tablecloth practically touched the emergency exit door. A massive marble pillar, cold and unyielding, blocked my entire view of the dance floor. I sat there alone. 2 empty chairs flanked me like silent guards. The red exit sign above my head flickered with a rhythmic, annoying buzz. Up on the stage, Brittany looked like a diamond under the heavy spotlights. $12,000 of white lace and choreographed lies. She gripped the microphone with manicured fingers and began the roll call of her beloved circle. She thanked the Sterling parents for their grace. She thanked Susan for being her North Star. She thanked Michael for being the father every girl deserved. She even thanked the florist from New York and the baker who had flown in from Paris. My name never crossed her lips. Not once. It was a surgical strike, a total removal of my existence from the family map. I saw Chad, the groom, lean in and whisper something to her, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Brittany just laughed, a bright, hollow sound, and pivoted to a joke about their honeymoon in Cabo. She was not just hiding me anymore. She was deleting me in real time. The air in the ballroom felt thin, poisonous. I pushed back my mahogany chair, the screech of wood on the floor swallowed by a sudden, aggressive burst of jazz from the band. I did not head for the bar. I headed for the west balcony. The transition was jarring, inside the noise and the suffocating heat of 200 egos. Outside, the sharp biting chill of the Connecticut woods and the rhythmic, indifferent chirp of crickets. Michael was there. He was leaned against the stone railing, staring out at the darkened tree line. In his hand was a heavy crystal glass filled with Macallan, 2 fingers of amber liquid that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. He was hiding. It was his signature move. When the fire starts, Michael Berry finds a corner and a drink. He enjoys the spoils of the war without ever stepping into the trenches. He looked smaller in his tuxedo, like a child playing dress-up in a world he did not understand. My heels clicked against the stone, rhythmic, deliberate. He did not turn around until I was 3 feet away. "Are you hiding, Dad?" The voice did not belong to a daughter. It belonged to a medic calling out a casualty. Michael flinching was the only answer I got. His shoulders hiked up toward his ears. He turned slowly, the amber liquid in his glass sloshing against the crystal sides. "Don't do this tonight, Laura," he said. His voice was a thin, pathetic plea, the sound of a man who had traded his backbone for a seat at a billionaire's table. "It's your sister's day. Just let things be. For once, just keep the peace." I took a step forward, entering the pool of yellow light from the ballroom windows. The wind caught my hair, whipping it across my face. I did not blink. She did not say my name, Michael. 200 people heard her thank the guy who delivered the cake, but not the sister she claims is unstable. She told the Sterlings I am a violent nutcase to cover for the fact that we are just regular people. And you sat there. You laughed. Michael looked down at his Macallan. He swirled it, the ice clinking, a cold, lonely sound. She is just trying to make it work, Lara. This is a big deal for us. The Sterlings, they are a different breed. We have to fit in. It is for the family image. The family image, I repeated. The words felt like ash in my mouth. In the field, you never leave a man behind. It is the first rule you learn. You do not leave your own. But here, in this house, you would leave me bleeding on the asphalt if it meant Susan got a new designer bag. He did not have an answer. He never did. He just took a long, slow swallow of the scotch, letting the burn distract him from the shame. He was a deserter, a man who had abandoned his post a long time ago. I am done, I said. The words did not come with tears. There was no lump in my throat, just the absolute, freezing clarity of a soldier cutting ties with a failed mission. Lara, don't be dramatic. No, I cut him off. My voice was a blade. From this second on, you aren't my father. You are just the manager of an Ace hardware store in a town I am never coming back to. We are no contact. Don't call me. Don't send Susan to my door. You chose this side of the pillar. Stay there. I turned on my heel. I did not wait for him to find a cowardly rebuttal. I did not wait for him to look me in the eye. I walked away from the Macallan and the silence, the wind at my back. I pushed through the glass doors and back into the ballroom. The chandeliers were blinding now, the light reflecting off 1,000 fake smiles. I did not go back to table 18. I walked straight to the central bar. Charles Sterling was there. He was not dancing. He was leaning against the marble counter, his phone gripped in his hand. His face was hard, his eyes fixed on the screen. He was looking at a digital archive of an old newspaper, the I-95 article. As I walked past him, heading for the exit, he looked up. His eyes did not go to my face first. They locked onto the pearl earrings, the way they caught the light, the way they matched the description in his head. He straightened up, his hand hovering over the bar. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. Wait, he called out. The billionaire was not looking at the hospital admin Brittany had described. He was looking at the woman who had held his life together in the rain. I did not stop. I kept walking. The war was officially underway. I walked past the central bar, my eyes fixed on the heavy oak exit doors. I didn't want a drink. I didn't want a seat. I wanted the cold night air of Connecticut to scrub the smell of this room off my skin. But the marble counter felt like a barrier I couldn't cross. Charles Sterling was there. He set his crystal glass down with a heavy thud, the ice clinking against the sides like a warning bell. He stepped away from the bar, moving with a sudden, predatory speed that cut off my path. He was a big man, powerful. The kind of man who owned the ground he stood on. But right now, his face was a map of confusion and something that looked a lot like fear. He didn't look at my dress. He didn't look at my hair. His eyes were locked on mine, searching for something buried deep in the static. Can I ask you something? His voice was a low growl, cutting through the upbeat swing music of the ballroom. He didn't wait for a nod. 3 years ago, where were you stationed? I stopped. My spine went rigid. The internal alarm of a soldier in an unsecured zone started blaring. I shifted my weight to the balls of my feet, my hands falling naturally to my sides. Readiness was a habit I couldn't break. St. Luke's Regional, Flight Medic, Life Star Unit, I answered. Short, clipped, the way you report to a commanding officer. Charles took a step closer. The air between us smelled of expensive Cuban cigars and the sharp, clean scent of high-end gin. His hand shook, just a fraction, as he reached toward his pocket and then pulled back. Were you on Interstate 95 that night? His voice dropped to a jagged whisper. November 14th. The pileup near Exit 8. The ballroom vanished. The chandeliers, the silk, the fake smiles. All of it drowned in a sudden, violent memory. the smell of burning diesel fuel, the freezing rain that felt like needles on my neck, the scream of twisted metal being torn apart by the jaws of life. I could feel the mud on my knees again. I could hear the wet, heavy thud of blood hitting the asphalt. Yes, I said. The word was a heavy stone. Charles's eyes went glassy. A single tear tracked through the lines of his face, disappearing into his collar. He looked like he was seeing a ghost in the middle of a parade. "It was you," he choked out. "You crawled through the broken glass. The fuel was leaking everywhere, and the paramedics were shouting at you to get back, but you wouldn't let go. You held my head still for 47 minutes in that rain. You didn't even have a coat on." I didn't answer. I could still feel the weight of his skull in my palms. I could still feel the way his pulse had thrashed against my fingertips. A dying bird trying to fly out of his neck. I had stayed in that wreckage until my hands went numb, talking to him about anything I could think of just to keep him from drifting into the black. Charles's jaw tightened. He looked like a man who had finally found the missing piece of his soul. "You told me a story," he said, his voice raw. "You told me about your mother. You told me she left you a pair of pearl earrings and that you wore them every shift because they were your lucky charm. You told me if I stayed awake, you'd show them to me when we got to the trauma bay. You used that story as an anchor to keep me from drowning when my legs had no feeling left." His eyes dropped, locking onto my ears. The small white pearls caught the light of the chandelier, glowing with a soft, natural radiance that no diamond in this room could touch. "It's you," he whispered. "It's really you." I swallowed hard. For the first time in this entire miserable week, the steel plating around my heart cracked. My throat felt like it was full of dry sand. I didn't say a word. I just gave him a single, sharp nod. At the other end of the ballroom, the speakers crackled to life. The MC's voice boomed over the crowd, cheerful and obscene. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, please join us for the father-daughter dance." I looked past Charles's shoulder. There was Michael. He was grinning, his face flushed with wine, leading Brittany to the center of the floor. Brittany looked like a saint in white, her hand resting on the shoulder of the man who had helped her bury my name. They looked perfect. They looked like the kind of family people envied. It was a masterpiece of deception, staged right in front of the man whose life I had saved. I know what it's like to be the person who does the heavy lifting while someone else takes the credit. If you've ever sat in the shadows while the liars took the spotlight, I need you to hit that like button right now. Leave a comment with the word hero if you believe the truth is worth the fight. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the moment the walls finally come down. Your support is the only thing keeping the light on in this dark room. Charles's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. It wasn't an attack, it was a desperate hold. "Don't you leave," he commanded. His voice had lost the tremor. The billionaire was back, and he was fueled by a cold, righteous fury. He turned to Eleanor, who had appeared at his side like a silent shadow. "Eleanor, keep her at table 18. Do not let her walk out those doors." "Charles," she asked, her eyes searching his face. "Just do it," he snapped. He didn't look at the dance floor. He didn't look at the bride. He turned and marched toward the glass doors leading to the back garden, ignoring the cold Connecticut wind. He pulled his phone from his pocket and punched in a number with a violent thumb. "Get me Sarah Jones," he barked into the receiver. "Chief surgeon at St. Luke's. I don't care if she's in a meeting. Tell her Charles Sterling is on the line and I need an emergency copy of a service file, right now." Inside, Brittany spun in Michael's arms. Her white dress flared out like a cloud. She was laughing, convinced she had won. She didn't see Charles standing in the dark outside, his face lit by the cold glow of his phone. She didn't know that the 47 minutes on I-95 had just caught up to her. The death warrant for her reputation had just been signed. Table 18 was a social graveyard, tucked so far into the shadows of the Oakmont Club that the expensive floral centerpieces looked like gray weeds. I sat there, my spine fused to the back of the mahogany chair. My palms were still tacky with dried blood from the crescent-shaped wounds I'd carved into them during Brittany's speech. I didn't hide them. I didn't need to. In this room, I was a ghost, an invisible stain on a perfect wedding. Then, the air shifted. The rustle of heavy, expensive silk announced her before she spoke. Eleanor Sterling didn't walk. She glided with the authority of a woman who owned the ground she stood on. She didn't head for the head table where the family sat. Instead, she pulled out the empty chair next to mine at table 18. Her diamonds caught the dim light, casting sharp, cold reflections against the marble pillar that was meant to hide me. "Respect isn't about where they seat you, Laura," she said. Her voice was a calm, low vibration that cut right through the noise of the crowd. She tapped a manicured finger on the white linen, her eyes locking onto mine. "It's about who chooses to sit beside you." She didn't look at the stage, she looked at me. And for the first time in a decade, I felt the weight of being seen. On the stage, the upbeat jazz music died a sudden, violent death. A sharp, electric screech from the sound system tore through the ballroom, making the guests flinch and reach for their ears. Charles Sterling had stepped onto the dais. He didn't wait for the MC to introduce him. He didn't wait for a lull in the gossip. He snatched the microphone out of the MC's hand with a force that nearly tipped the stand over. 200 people went dead silent. The only sound was the heavy rhythmic thud of Charles's breathing through the massive speakers. Brittany stood a few feet away, her white dress shimmering under the cold blue spotlights. She was beaming, her hands clasped to her chest in a pose of practiced humility. She was waiting for the billionaire to bless her marriage. She was waiting for the final coronation of her long-game lie. Charles didn't look at her. His face was a slab of cold, gray granite. 3 years ago, I died on Interstate 95, Charles's voice boomed. It wasn't a toast. It was a war cry. The steering column had crushed my chest. My spine was seconds away from snapping. Before the first siren even reached the scene, there was a woman in the mud. She didn't have a badge. She didn't have a name. She just had 2 hands that refused to let me slip into the black. The guests froze. Forks stayed halfway to mouths. I could see Michael at the head table, his face turning a sickly shade of gray as he gripped his wine glass until his knuckles turned white. "I've spent every day since then looking for her," Charles continued, his eyes scanning the room like a predator hunting in high grass. "I wanted to thank the hero who held my life together for 47 minutes in the freezing rain while fuel leaked all over us. And tonight, I found her. She's in this room." A murmur rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Brittany's smile didn't fade. It just froze into a terrifying, waxy mask. Her eyes darted around, trying to find the hero Charles was talking about. She still didn't get it. She couldn't conceive of a world where I mattered. Charles raised his arm, his finger pointing straight at the dark corner by the kitchen doors, straight at the girl in the $39 Target dress. "She's sitting at table 18, he roared. "Her name is Laura Berry." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the lungs. 200 pairs of eyes swung toward me. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I sat there like a statue, the white light from the foyer catching the pearl earrings on my ears. "Laura?" Brittany's voice was a weak, confused squeak that didn't even need a microphone to be heard in the stillness. Charles stepped to the edge of the stage, his shadow looming over the front row like a mountain. 20 minutes ago, the woman standing next to me called this hero just a soldier. She told this entire room that Laura was a violent headcase, a ticking time bomb with PTSD. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He snapped it open. The sound was like a whip crack against the marble walls. "I just got off the phone with the chief surgeon at St. Luke's," Charles hissed into the mic. "I have the service file right here. Laura Berry isn't a head case. She's a decorated flight medic with 3 commendations for bravery under fire. She wasn't unstable. She was kneeling on broken glass, saving my life while her own sister was busy dreaming up ways to erase her from existence." He turned to Brittany, his disgust radiating off him in waves. "To cover up your own shallow, fake-ass life, you turned your sister's sacrifice into a sickness. You lied to my son. You lied to my wife. You turned a hero into a secret because she didn't fit your aesthetic." Brittany shrank into her $12,000 silk dress. She looked small, shriveled. Her face was as white as the linens. She looked at Michael, begging for a shield, but Michael was staring at his shoes, the coward's reflex taking over completely. Then it happened. From the middle of the room, a man stood up. He started to clap, slowly, deliberately. Then a woman at table 4 joined him. Within 5 seconds, the sound was a landslide. 200 of Fairfield County's elite, the people Brittany had spent a year trying to impress, stood up. They weren't looking at the bride. They were facing the girl at the back of the room. The applause was thunderous, a rhythmic, bone-shaking roar that made the crystal glasses on the tables vibrate. I sat in the center of the storm, my heart beating a steady military 4 count. I didn't feel happy. I felt clean. I felt like the mud from I-95 had finally been washed away. On the stage, Brittany's world disintegrated in real time. She reached out to touch Chad's arm, her eyes wide and wet with the realization that the game was over. Chad didn't look at her. He didn't even acknowledge she was alive. He reached down, unpinned the white flower from his lapel, and dropped it onto the floor like it was trash. He stepped away from her, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. "We're done," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but in the sudden lull of the applause, it sounded like a gavel hitting a block. He turned and walked off the stage, leaving his bride standing alone in the spotlight, a ghost in a $12,000 shroud. I stood up. I didn't look at Brittany. I didn't look at Michael. I walked toward the exit, my head held high, my boots clicking a steady iron beat against the marble. The wedding was over. The truth was just getting started. Charles Sterling didn't move from the center of the stage. He stood there like a mountain that had decided to fall on anyone standing in its way. He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a checkbook. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was amplified by the microphone, a sharp, rhythmic scraping that made the guests hold their breath. "Effective immediately," Charles's voice boomed, skipping the pleasantries. "The Sterling Foundation is authorizing a $200,000 emergency scholarship. It's for advanced medical training. And the first recipient is the only person in this room who knows the real value of a life." He tore the check from the book. Zip. The sound of the paper separating from the stub was like a bone snapping in the silence. Charles stepped off the dais and walked straight past the head table. He didn't even glance at Brittany. He stopped in front of table 18, reaching across the marble pillar to take my hand. His grip was dry and powerful. "Finish your MD, Laura," he said, his voice dropping into a low, private growl. "The world needs more medics. It has enough liars." Behind us, the silence broke. It didn't break with a cheer. It broke with a shriek. "This is her fault." Brittany's voice was a jagged, ugly thing. She was clawing at the white silk of her dress, her face contorted into something unrecognizable. "She should have stayed quiet. She was supposed to stay in the corner. She's ruining my life." The scream echoed off the crystal chandeliers. It was a confession. The social elite of Fairfield County didn't look away because they were shocked. They looked away because she was no longer useful to them. A narcissist who has been exposed is just a loud noise in an expensive room. They turned their backs, returning to their cold steaks and hushed gossip, effectively erasing Brittany Sterling before the wedding cake was even cut. 10 minutes later, the hallway outside the ballroom was a refrigerator. The air was cold, smelling of floor wax and the bitter, metallic scent of a dying marriage. Chad had Brittany by the arm, his fingers digging into the lace of her sleeve. He wasn't being gentle. He was a corporate lawyer now, and his wife was a liability. "You lied to me," Chad hissed. His voice was a razor, no shouting, just the cold, clinical precision of a man filing a motion to dismiss. "You lied to my father. You smeared a veteran to cover your own tracks." Brittany tried to reach for his face, her eyes wide and wet, but he stepped back like she was contagious. "Listen to me," Chad commanded. "You are going back in there. You are going to take that microphone, and you are going to tell the truth. Every word of it. You will apologize to your sister. If you don't, I'm calling my firm's divorce department before the sun comes up. The housing fund is gone. The New York apartment is off the table. Apologize. Or call a lawyer. Your choice." Brittany didn't fight back. She didn't have any weapons left. She slumped against the wallpaper, her $12,000 shroud pooling around her feet like spilled milk. She started to sob. A weak, gasping sound that had nothing to do with regret and everything to do with the loss of her paycheck. I was standing near the foyer when Michael found me. He looked like he'd aged 20 years in an hour. His tuxedo was rumpled, and he smelled like too much cheap wine and even more regret. He reached out, his hands shaking as he tried to grab my shoulder. "Laura, please," he croaked. He was crying now, the big messy tears of a coward who had finally run out of places to hide. "I didn't know it was this bad. I thought we were just keeping the peace. Forgive me, honey. Please, I'm your father." I looked at him. I didn't feel the old familiar sting in my chest. I didn't feel the urge to scream. I just felt a deep, exhausted pity. He wasn't a monster. He was just a small, weak man who had spent his life letting other people build walls around his soul. "I don't hate you, Michael," I said. My voice was steady, a medic's voice. "But I don't forgive you either. Forgiveness is for people who made a mistake. You made a choice. Every time you hung up that phone, every time you let Susan push me into the basement, you chose a quiet life over your own daughter." He tried to step closer, to force an embrace I didn't want. I stepped back, my spine hitting the cold glass of the exit door. "You chose her," I said, my voice as final as a heartbeat stopping. "You get to live with that choice. You get to live with the memory of this night every time you walk into that Ace Hardware store. Don't call me. Don't come to St. Luke's. We're done." I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't need the last word. I turned and walked toward the ballroom entrance. Inside, the speakers crackled with feedback. A sharp, high-pitched hum that made the guests wince. Brittany was on the stage. She was shaking so hard the microphone was hitting her teeth, creating a rhythmic, metallic tapping. Her voice was a broken whisper as she began to speak. She confessed to the fake medical reports. She admitted to the lies about the PTSD. She stammered out a sorry that sounded like it was being pulled out of her chest with a pair of pliers. I didn't walk up to the stage to accept it. I didn't need to stand in her light. I stood by the heavy oak doors, watching her crumble from a distance. I gave her a single, sharp nod, the acknowledgement of a soldier watching an enemy surrender unconditionally. Then I pushed the door open. The Connecticut night hit me like a bucket of ice water. It was sharp. It was clean. It didn't smell like perfume or lies. It smelled like wet pine needles and the coming winter. I walked toward my Honda Civic, my heels clicking against the wet asphalt with a steady iron beat. I sat in the driver's seat and put the key in the ignition. I didn't look back at the mansion. I didn't look at the lights. I just rolled down the window and let the cold air fill my lungs. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a ghost. I wasn't a secret. I put the car in gear and drove away. The Sterling estate disappeared in my rearview mirror, a glittering cage of glass and gold that no longer had a hold on me. The road ahead was dark, but my headlights were strong. And for a combat medic, that's all the light you ever need to find your way home. The silence in Fairfield County is the loudest sound you'll ever hear. It's not the quiet of the woods or the peace of a sleeping house. It's the sound of social death. Within a week of the Oakmont disaster, the fallout moved through the suburbs like a surgical strike. The Sterling family didn't just walk away. They cauterized the wound. Brittany's life, the one she had spent 10 years building out of lies and filtered photos, disintegrated in real time. The country club membership? Canceled. The luxury apartment fund? Liquidated by Chad's firm before the first Monday morning sun hit the pavement. I heard from a nurse at St. Luke's that Brittany had been spotted at a local diner, her $12,000 dress replaced by a cheap hoodie, looking like a ghost haunting her own life. No one called her, no one invited her to the garden parties. She had become a liability, a toxic brand that even the most desperate social climbers refused to touch. Back at my apartment, the mailbox was a crime scene of regret. Every Tuesday, a fresh batch of thick, cream-colored envelopes arrived. Michael's handwriting was easy to recognize, shaky, desperate, the ink smudged by what I assumed were performative tears. He wrote about misunderstandings. He wrote about starting over. He sent long, rambling pages begging for a forgiveness that would make him feel like a good man again. I didn't rip them up. I didn't burn them. That would require an emotional investment I no longer possessed. I simply walked into my kitchen, pulled open the bottom junk drawer, the one filled with dead batteries, old takeout menus, and tangled charging cables, and dropped the unread letters inside. I closed the drawer with a firm, final kick. Michael Berry had made his choice at the head table. He had chosen the lie over the daughter. He was a ghost now, and ghosts don't get a seat at my table. Susan had vanished too. Her brand of poison required a host to survive, and with the Sterlings gone and Michael's reputation in tatters, she'd moved on to find a new target. I didn't care where she went. To me, they had all died that night under the crystal chandeliers. The $200,000 hit the hospital's financial office like a thunderbolt. The Sterling Emergency Scholarship. It was a massive public investment in the future of combat medicine, and my name was at the very top of the press release. Laraberry. Every letter was correct. Every title was accurate. It wasn't just a check, it was a shield. I was in the locker room at St. Luke's, the air smelling of sterile floor wax and the burnt coffee of a double shift. Dr. Sarah Jones leaned against the row of dented metal lockers, watching me prep for the day. She had a look on her face I hadn't seen since my last tour in the field. Respect. Charles Sterling called again this morning, she said, tapping her clipboard. He wanted a progress report on the hero of his foundation. He's already talking about a wing named after you if you finish that trauma certification early. I sat on the bench and pulled on my combat boots. The leather snapped against the linoleum, a sharp, rhythmic sound that centered me. I didn't smile. I didn't look for a mirror to see the hero everyone was talking about. I just focused on the laces, pulling them tight, double knotting them with the precision of a soldier who knows that a loose thread can cost a life. I'm a medic, Sarah, I said, standing up. My spine was a straight line of steel. I'm a soldier. That's enough for me. She nodded, her eyes lingering on the small pearl earrings I wore with my scrubs. Yeah, I guess it is. 2 weeks later, the November sun hit my kitchen table in a sharp, golden rectangle. It was the kind of morning that felt clean, like the world had been scrubbed raw by the frost. I stood there, drinking black coffee, listening to the quiet of my own home. My dog tags clinked softly against my chest, a metallic heartbeat. On the fridge, held up by a plastic medical magnet, was a heavy cream-colored card. It was an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner at the Sterling estate. Eleanor's handwriting was elegant, dark ink on expensive paper. It didn't have the frantic energy of Michael's letters. It was a statement of fact. Laura, the note read, our table has 12 seats this year, and there is one chair at the head of the room with your name on it. We made sure the spelling was perfect. We'll see you at 4. I ran my thumb over the embossed paper. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a seat at a table where I didn't have to hide. It was a family that didn't share my blood, but shared my soul. A family that saw the scars and called them beautiful. I looked at the old Polaroid pinned next to the invite. My mother, smiling in the sun. I looked into the mirror above the sink. I didn't see the shadow that lived in the basement anymore. I didn't see the ticking time bomb Brittany had tried to build out of her own fears. I saw a woman who had crawled through the glass and come out the other side without losing herself. I saw the metals. I saw the pearls. I saw the truth. I put on my jacket, the weight of it familiar and grounding. I grabbed my keys and walked toward the door, my boots clicking a steady iron beat against the floorboards. My name is Laura Berry. I am a combat medic. And the truth? It was the only weapon I ever needed to win the war.